Hello, today we'll be looking over the inquiries section of Receta. This will be the area where you'll store the initial inquiry that you get from your customer or potential customer with regards to them placing an order. In the past or currently you may store these inquiries in an email from a customer or word of mouth or written down on a piece of paper, and obviously that gets spread around amongst different staff members and it may be difficult to track where you are with specific inquiries before they go to the quotation and or sales order stage. Receta helps that by having a dedicated area where you can store these inquiries and any staff member can see the nature of each inquiry and its progression through the system. There are two specific sections to this. There is the inquiries section itself, which you'll find under sales and inquiries, and in the admin section there is another area where we can set some things called inquiry steps, which I'll look at the end of this video. But if we go straight into inquiry now, if we take the premise that we've had an inquiry off a new customer and we want to store it. Initially what we would do is you would go straight into customers and add that customer. Even though they aren't necessarily an ongoing customer, you still want an area where we can store those details. Don't worry that that may fill up your customer basis in Receta. You can quite easily filter these out as you go along. But if we go in and go inquiries and add, we can see here the first form that a staff member would fill in to log the inquiry. Here we would type in the name of the customer that we'd already pre-stored in Receta. So if we look at either a demo customer or a test customer, for example, oh, there's one called test straight away, and it's already found it for me. If there was more than one result, it would bring up a list and we could select the customer that we were looking for. The next step is to ask what is the inquiry type. Now generally this will fall into one of two categories, a pre-quote or a pre-sales. With a pre-quote, that inquiry will be something which is generally from a brand new customer, but there's something stopping you initially going straight to the quotation phase. Generally this may be you need to get a price for an ingredient, you may need to ask your production manager some questions about when it could go onto certain machines, etc, etc. So you would decide as a staff member which would be the best area for this to be stored in. With pre-quote, generally it would be something like I say that's stopping you going to price. With pre-sales, it may be some production requirement, for example. In this case, we'll say it's a pre-quote. Status, unless we have a reason not to, generally you'd leave this on pending to start off with. And all this status does is show us and other staff members looking at that its progression through the system. There are four statuses, as we can see. Pending is that the inquiry has not been handled yet. It's just at its very beginning of being put onto Receta. If we're going straight back to the customer with a question, and they were the hold up for us progressing this inquiry, you'd click waiting on customer. If, however, we'd passed this off to a member of staff and the customer was waiting on us getting back to them, then obviously waiting on us is the status you would select. Finally, when this inquiry gets pushed over to be a quote and or an order, you would give it that status of gone to quote order, so any staff member looking at it would know that that inquiry had finished. Action date is very simply the date that this needs to be actioned by. If we have a question here where the customer needs to know something by a specific date, we can set that here in the action date. If we select that a particular staff member needs to action it, you would select it in this drop down here and select the staff member in question who would need to action it. What would happen when we store this is that, first of all, that staff member you've selected would get a notification via email to say that they'd been added to this inquiry and they needed to take a look at it and see what they needed to do. Also, when the action date arrives, the dashboard up here would show a warning in red on the front page to everybody looking at it that there was an inquiry that needed actioning that day. On the right hand side, we have a huge area where any staff member can type the nature of their inquiry. Obviously you'd want to give as much detail as possible so that other staff members looking at it would know exactly what was happening, and you could note things like the date the inquiry came in, who you were speaking to, just general notes to give any other staff members a really good idea of what was happening with that inquiry. Finally, if the customer at this stage provides a purchase order number for their potential purchase, you could log it here if you so wish. Finally, we would hit save to system and obviously that would go in. If we go to inquiries and then find, we can see some of the inquiries which we've already had. Here in this case we could do a search and find them, but we've only got one in question, so we can just look at it. Before we go into it, one quick thing I'd like to show you is here we can see that status that we quickly mentioned previously, and also the fact that this customer has provided us luckily with a purchase order number. Here we can see some tick boxes, or crosses should I say, with certain titles: first call, second step, pricing. Ignore those for now. Those are to do with the inquiry steps, which I'll get to briefly. Here we can see the very beginnings of the notes we've added against this inquiry. And finally, if we wanted to print this inquiry just to take it to another staff member, for example, or in meetings, you can click that and quickly print it. If we go into this inquiry, you can see a very similar form to the one we've just filled in to add an inquiry. We do have certain areas that are set in stone. We can't transfer this between different businesses, for example, or change the date it was added, but all the other things can be edited as they were. We can add more notes, and we can add another purchase order number. But as you probably see, there are two additional fields we can now fill in. The first one we'll look at is on this right hand side, a file upload. The customer, after the inquiry, may provide you with additional documentation in the form of a Word document, an Excel sheet, a PDF. And if you wanted to make a record of that, you can upload it here. This would store it in Receta, and then you don't have to look in your own email inboxes, for example, to try and find it. Finally, you can set in the admin area, which I'll show you in a short while, things called inquiry steps. If, as the main administrator for Receta, you wanted all of your staff members to follow the same routine when an inquiry came in, you could set predefined steps here. Those predefined steps would appear on every single inquiry, and it would be up to the staff members dealing with the inquiry to tick to say that they had completed certain steps. Anybody then looking at the inquiry, without even having to read the notes here, could quite easily see what had happened to these steps in terms of the processes that you have to go through with each inquiry. You could save it to the system and then action it therein. Finally, we will go to show you how you add those inquiry steps we've just previously been speaking to. It's very straightforward: admin, general, and then inquiry steps. As you can see, those are the steps that we've previously added. What you can do if you wish to add a new inquiry step is click the Add New Inquiry step, give it a title and the description that you'd want it to have. If we quickly go back, you can see here in this case we've got a step called First Call, and on the first call we need to discuss with the customer their requirements, try to get an idea as to the likely sales volumes and current prices if they're buying from an alternative supplier, for example. If we wanted to, we could edit that and remove it, etc. And every single one of these sales steps or inquiry steps would appear on each and every inquiry for the staff member to tick to say that they had completed it. One final point: if you use these arrows here and click and hold, you can drag and drop them into a different order, so that if a new inquiry step is added and you actually want the staff member to, let's say, do that first, you can quite easily drag and drop it to the top of the list, and that would always appear at the top. Hopefully this video has given you an overview of how the inquiries works, and I hope you enjoyed it.